afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Middle East Institute, to the famed Boardman Room. I'm Phil Wilcox. I'm the president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace, and the three organizations, Middle East Institute, Foundation, and ANERA, welcome all of you. You know, today there are so many terrible crises, which all of them demand more attention than they get in the media, but the two severe humanitarian crises that are less mentioned than they should be are the flow of refugees out of Syria. As you know, there are over 2 million refugees who have fled Syria, and I think something like 5 million who are internal refugees inside of Syria. And that has placed an enormous burden on the refugees and the governments and humanitarian agencies that are trying to help them. The flow of refugees includes many Palestinians, as you know, because Syria was one of the destinations of refugees who were forced out of their homes in 1948, and then again in 67. And there are some 90,000 Palestinian refugees who have forced out during the current Syrian civil war. And because Lebanon is a small country, already the host, and a never entirely happy host, of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees who left mostly in 1948. The refugees from Syria, the Palestinian refugees, have largely become the occupants of the Palestinian refugee camps. And we're lucky today to have the ANERA representative in Lebanon, Samar El Yassir, who is running ANERA's part of this massive humanitarian task, and ANERA is working with UNRWA and other agencies. As you know, ANERA is one of the oldest of the NGOs who have worked on humanitarian and development assistance in the Middle East for many, many years. And they have operations in Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza, and in the camps in Jordan and in Lebanon. And so this crisis has placed a huge new challenge to ANERA as well. I know ANERA, I know it quite well. I was the Consul General in Jerusalem many years ago from 88 to 91. And ANERA was even in those days, the most effective of the American NGOs serving Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And ANERA has a way of responding quickly to challenges, and I think is one of the great American institutions that has won friends for our country from by now millions of Palestinians. The ANERA director in Jerusalem, whose jurisdiction is in the West Bank and Gaza, is Paul Butler. So we have Paul with us today here. And Samir and Paul are going to talk about their respective refugee crises. The West Bank, the Gaza refugee crisis is different. It has grown in some ways worse in recent years. Originally, when I served in Jerusalem, there was free passage between Israel and Gaza. There was a robust economy in Gaza. Since then, there have been a host of crises in Gaza, including the terrible caste-led war back in 2009. Paul, I hope you can tell us about the status of the two closures that are crippling the Gazan economy and imposing huge hardship on the Gazan public, both the closure of the tunnels, which had become the primary route for passage of goods between Egypt and Gaza, and the state of the Israeli closure, which has been growing over many years. It started during the beginning of the Oslo process, and it has waxed and waned. It has mostly waxed, and so Gaza, while it is a society of educated, well-educated, energetic people, the considerable business and entrepreneurial class has not been able to begin to realize its potential because it's often awful closure. So, Samar, would you begin and talk about the refugees in Lebanon, and then we'll turn to Paul. Take about maybe 20 minutes each, and we'll have time for discussion. Thanks. Samar?
Hi, and thank you for your invitation. As you know, I'm here today to talk to you all about the conditions of Palestinian Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And in doing that, I want to establish first some facts that you may already know. First, that Lebanon is a very small country, 10,000 kilometers, and the total population of which is 4 million in total. Of course, we have in the diaspora much more than this, but those who are resident in Lebanon are approximately 3.5 million of population. 2 years ago, plus the Syrian crisis, the hostilities in Syria started, and this resulted in a big outflow of Syrian refugees out of the country, mostly taking refuge in 3 countries: Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. The Lebanese government, since the beginning of the hostility, has decided to take 2 positions. First is to take a neutral position, that we are not part of this war. So that was the stand of the government, although this was not respected by all parties in the country. And second is that it will not say no to any refugee who wishes to enter Lebanon. Our borders are open, but the government will not be responsible for responding to their needs, simply because it doesn't have the resources, and this is the responsibility of the international community. So in effect, what happened is that as the crisis and the hostilities in Syria was expanding, the refugee influx and inflow to Lebanon was increasing, until we stand today of estimated 1 million Syrian refugees are resident in Lebanon, which practically means 1/3 of the population is now Syrian refugees. And which means that these refugees, because the government did not opt first to establish camps for them or take this responsibility, they are all over the country, and which has serious security and humanitarian impacts. Having said so, to set the scene, among these Syrian refugees, we have a distinct group, which in number might not be the most impactful in number terms, but they have a distinct, if you want, situation. And those are the Palestinian Syrians, who also were brought into the crisis later into the crisis, because as you know, also Palestinians living in Syria since 1948 have enjoyed equal rights under the Syrian regime, where they were as equal to the Syrians, except the political right to vote. And they had access to education, to work, to health, and enjoyed their lives there. When they were brought into the crisis and the camps there started to be targets for hostility and bombardment, also the Palestinian Syrians had to flee. And most of them started to come into Lebanon, with gradual increases that started in a few hundreds to now reach to approximately 45,000 refugees, who are now living also in Palestinian camps and spread all over the country. Although the number at one point, if we are to speak numbers, have been reached by UNRWA of those registered to 70,000 and then dropped to 45,000. The reason for this is that since August, there are restrictions of entry of Palestinian Syrians to Lebanon. So practically, those who were in Lebanon and went back to Syria to check on their homes and families were not allowed to come back. So what are their conditions? How do they live? I'll try because the time is very limited, I'll try to give you a very quick picture. And this ANERA has done a needs assessment early in the year and has updated this needs assessment through our daily encounter and programs of response to the refugees. In terms of psychological, if you want, impact of displacement of the refugees, 90% have witnessed some kind of distressful situation and violence before they left Syria. And this caused them to take refuge in another country. And this ranges from the killing of a relative to destroyment of a house to personal injuries and loss of life. So this psychological distress is major and has prompted people to leave their homes and take refuge in another home. As soon as they entered Lebanon, they were exposed to other conditions. Basically, their first, like all the refugees, the first problems they face, and the major problem they face, is shelter. Since shelter is not provided by an agency or government, and by law is not allowed because the government does not allow camps, these people are, have difficulty in finding shelter. Till now, because of the generosity of the host community, more than half are hosted by the people of Lebanon, whether they are Palestinians or Lebanese. But also guests are welcome for a short time. When the displacement becomes, the stay is prolonged, and now we're speaking about 2 years plus with no hope, the tension between host community and the refugee is on the increase. And how long can this be endured is questionable. And so we have some people, like 40-50%, who are hosted by other people, mostly in the camps of Lebanon. But also you have the other 50% who either rent but are unable to sustain their rent because their rent is just too high and they cannot sustain it, or are looking for any place to sit, whether it's a kiosk, unfinished building. So the homeless, what is known here in this country as homeless conditions, are on the increase and are happening. And this, of course, for all of you, you understand that this has critical implications on all aspects, especially security. The more prone, they become more prone to violence, especially among the vulnerable groups of women, children, and so on, and has implications on their health and so on. Housing is more than, we know that more than a quarter of the houses are substandard houses. And by substandard, we mean that these houses are without windows. They have open vents, open windows, and just not fit for living. And I see this, and it's very critical. Housing means security for any person. And with the winter approaching, it becomes even more paramount and more important condition to have a roof on your top for you and for your children. And this is simply non-existent for many of these refugees. Another condition that is of concern to us is the education of the children. In our study, we have found that 70% of the families have at least one child out of school. And if we calculate this by the years of them missing school, now we know that it's been 2 years where they have missed school, and the third year is approaching. And although and this is only indicative of the shortage of humanitarian assistance in the response. The gaps are huge. International aid was simply not enough and is not fulfilling the gaps for the majority of refugees. In terms, just to mention something on education, also, and looking at education, those kids, when we try to understand why the majority of them do not go to school, we found two main conditions that prevent them from going to school. One is, of course, the unavailability of places, but the second, which is also of extreme importance, is the curriculum difference between what is taught in Syria and the curriculum taught in Lebanon, which is basically all languages in Syria are taught in Arabic, while in Lebanon you have subject matters are taught either, main subject matters, math, sciences, are taught either in French or in English. So a Syrian kid, even if they have a place in the school, is not able to follow up the curriculum. And so they need to set up classes for these Syrian kids taught in their own curriculums by Syrian teachers who understand this curriculum is what is needed. Another critical condition is the health conditions. Health is also a problem. For anybody living in these conditions, you can imagine what the health conditions will only deteriorate. Of specific importance are the unavailability or not enough medicines or treatments are afforded to the chronically ill. This is found in our study and documented. Mother and health services are insufficient, and communicable problems, related to overcrowdedness are on the increase, specifically licensed scabies, which is now spread all over the country. ANERA, with the help of some of its donors, has started to work on this condition to not only treat but also help prevent the spread of these conditions. Finally, I would like also to pinpoint a very important aspect. What I have mentioned so far is the humanitarian, if you want, gaps and the needs for this group. But also it's very important when we speak about the specific refugee group is to remember the protection gap, which is very specific to the Palestinian Syrians. As we know, the Syrian refugees are under the mandate and protection of the UN agency responsible for this, which is the UNHCR. While, because Palestinians fall out of the mandate of this agency, they fall under UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, who is mandated for relief operations and assistance, but does not have the responsibility or the mandate for protection. And in instances of displacement, protection and its responsibility with the member states within the United Nations system to find durable solution for the refugee status is missing for this group. And this is why this one implication is that we saw the restriction that is put now on the Lebanese government side not to afford them re-entry or entry in Lebanon has been left to the discretion of the Lebanese army. And their protection now within Syria is questionable. Many of these, their houses, as we have said, have been destroyed. There's no way that they can go, for example, to the Yarmouk now, which is now practically flattened, is left unknown. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to first give you some background information on Gaza, starting with the little bit about the geography. The Gaza Strip is approximately 20 miles long and approximately 10 miles wide and has 1.7 million people. The District of Columbia, the land area here, is about 70 square miles. I mean, we're talking about an area about 3 times the size of the District of Columbia. So, I mean, this illustrates sort of what the what the situation is in Gaza. I mean, very, very densely populated. Approximately 90% of those 1.7 million people are descendants of refugees from 1948. Gaza, there's an aquifer in Gaza that supplies most of the potable water. I mean, it's estimated that by the year 2020, it's going to be contaminated by incursions from the Mediterranean Sea. So you notice that. I mean, if you go to Gaza and just take a shower in someone's home or in a hotel, I mean, the water is very brackish. I mean, it's like going to Chesapeake Bay and just, taking a bath there. The sanitation situation, I mean, with such, high density of population, 1.7 million people, are basically non-existent. So you see large parts of the Gaza Strip, children playing in sewage, no trash collection. ANERA, we have 20 staff in our office in Gaza, which has been operating since the early 1980s. We have a parasite removal program that we're working on, and our surveys show that about 40% of children are infected with intestinal parasites. So, but, having said all of that, I mean, as Ambassador Wilcox stated, 30, 40 years ago, I mean, Gaza did have a thriving economy. I mean, I remember I was a student in the mid-'80s, and I, was studying in Cairo for my junior year, and I went over to Gaza and was able to just hop on a bus and go directly to the old city of Jerusalem. And when you got off there, you could see merchants from Gaza selling strawberries. And Gaza is very much known for its strawberries, and people could go back and forth. So I mean, it's outside of the discussion of this meeting, but something definitely happened between that time and now that really needs to be looked at. So anyway, I mean, for the population in Gaza over the last year, how have consumers been able to acquire goods? How has the economy been operating? I mean, access to Gaza since, it all started with the Oslo Accords in the early 1990s. That's when the first checkpoints went up in the permit system. But slowly, as a result of the ongoing conflict with the Israelis, access into Gaza from Israel has been slowly more and more restricted. So basically now you only have one access point, and the Israeli government restricts a lot of goods going in. I mean, they say it's to prevent Hamas, which has controlled Gaza since 2005, from getting materials to produce rockets and missiles and armaments. But the fact of the matter is that the Gaza economy, to a certain extent, is still closely linked with the Israeli economy. I mean, they use the shekel. Israeli goods are still available, but at a very expensive price. Because everything that gets trucked in from Israel, you have to pay a transport cost for. So it doesn't come in for free. So to make up for this factor, you have the Rafah, which is in the southern part of Gaza, the border crossing with Egypt. The Gazans being very, they have a remarkable degree of ingenuity. They went ahead and constructed hundreds of tunnels over the last years that connected Gaza to Egypt. I was actually able to see some of the tunnels when they were in full operation, but you could move a small pickup truck through the tunnels. There would be a tea person, serving tea in the tunnels while people were moving things back and forth. So it was incredible. And the Israelis were periodically, when they would do their airstrikes or their military operations, they would take them out, some of them. But there was more or less an understanding, even from, and I've spoken with Israeli officers in COGAT, that's the Israeli coordination mechanism when you go from the Israeli side into Gaza. They say, yeah, I mean, we know the tunnels exist, but it's we know that there's shortages, and it's more expensive to bring things in from Israel, so we allow this to operate. So up to a year ago, and with the Muslim Brotherhood in power in Egypt, which had close ties with Hamas, things were actually getting better. The Qataris had a $450 million development project that they had announced. They were, with Qatari money, they were rebuilding the Salahuddin Road. That's the coastal road that goes along Gaza. They were bringing in all the construction materials in from Gaza, into Gaza from Egypt, cement, base course, other inputs and machinery. And the tunnels were continuing to operate. So there was, wasn't the the level of the economic activity that existed before the 90s, but there's a lot of construction going on. The big change has been the change in government in Egypt. And all you have to do is just watch 10 minutes of Egyptian television in Arabic, and the military government now in Egypt demonizing Palestinians, in particular Gazans, saying that they were secretly funneling arms into Sinai. They were helping the Muslim Brotherhood take away liberties in Egypt. Palestinians who've been from Gaza who, were identified walking in the streets of Cairo were harassed. So really large level of demonization has occurred. This is only since, the overthrow of Morsi, in the beginning of the summer. But it's been very constant. And everyone should know that, because of Gaza's situation having been, administered by Egypt from 48 to 67, people in Gaza have strong links with Egypt. Many Gazans study in Cairo. They go to university. There's relatives living there. So after Morsi was overthrown, and there's still debating whether that was really a coup or not. But anyway, with his departure, that was all cut off. So people were not permitted to travel to Cairo anymore. It's very very difficult. So only recently, like just a week ago, some students were allowed to go back. So to give you an anecdote, our administration manager in the Gaza office, her daughter had not been able to go back to Cairo University, where she's studying nursing. So she missed out. She was missing out on half of the semester, and then she was allowed to go back. But after, for her to go just basically 500 feet across the border, it took her 15 hours. The other thing the Egyptians have done is just systematically plowed and destroyed most of the tunnels. And before coming here, to the States a couple weeks ago, I was in Rafah, and you can see the bulldozers just working, plowing under the tunnels. And they say that they, it's a really incredible estimate, but before all of this, they estimated about 500 to 600 tunnels were operating, which is hard to believe, but when you consider the small geographic area, but only about maybe 5 or less than 5 are operating right now. Very small tunnels. So Egyptian products, and more importantly, Egyptian fuel, which was much cheaper than Israeli fuel, have disappeared from the market. People in the U.S. complain about, I'm paying $3.50 $1 for a gallon. Well, Israeli fuel goes for about $9 a gallon. And Egyptian fuel was about $1 a gallon. So, Gazans were buying Egyptian fuel brought in through the tunnels. Now they have to pay, much higher prices. The other effect has been the Hamas government. They were making tons of money from the tunnels because they would control who had the tunnels. They would have taxes like a toll. So when goods would come out through the tunnel owner would have to pay a local Ministry of Finance official a tax for bringing, whether it was automobiles, consumer goods, fuel, food, tobacco, whatever, pay a tax. And Hamas was generating about $600 million a year from revenue from the tunnels. Incredible amount. But if you think about everything coming through the tunnels, and with hundreds of tunnels, it's easy to, all of that has sort of, has disappeared. So Hamas is under an incredible strain to raise revenue. So what have they done? They start to impose taxes on consumer goods, coffee, tobacco, fuel. So in addition to having to pay prices because things are coming in from Israel at a limited amount, I mean, it's not, we're not talking about the U.S.-Canada border where things just, freely come and go. I mean, when you want to bring anything in from Israel like we do, I mean, ANERA brings in for its development projects. I mean, last year we brought in 800 tons of construction materials, through KOGAT, through the Israeli authorities. They have a list of like 200 exemptions, and we have to go container by container, open everything up, and they inspect it. So it's they let it through, and they say, yes, we're concerned with the people in Gaza and the situation, but I mean, they have their rules and regulations, and you have to pay a high price, high transaction cost for bringing things in through them. But anyway, so on top of all of that, then Hamas is imposing taxes to raise revenue. They've also tried to go after international organizations like ourselves to pay taxes, for the staff to pay income tax. And one of the operating principles that we have as an American organization is, Hamas is, considered in the U.S. I mean, it's a terrorist organization, and there's all this legislation that prevents me personally from having any contact with them, and any of my staff, basically, except, maybe I mean, this came in from the consulate, was that, our low, because we need to go back and forth. I mean, I need to present my passport to a Hamas official when I go into Gaza, and I need to get a permit to come back out, and our staff need to get permits back and forth. But we can send our lowest paid employee in the Gaza office as a messenger to turn in the paperwork for our permit. So that's really the only amount of official contact that I'm allowed. So you have, on the one hand, all the average Gazan being squeezed economically, lack of water, lack of sanitation, consumer goods are going up. They can't go to Egypt. It's very difficult to, almost impossible to, get a permit to leave through the Israeli side. And you have an elected government, which then, kicked Fatah out in, very short but brutal civil war. That's can't pay the bills, basically, and are desperate for revenue. Other political changes in the regions with the new emir in Qatar. He's against Hamas now. I mean, Qatar had been supporting, so the new emir has basically ended this large development project. I mean, so that big $450 million project that I spoke about, they're going to just finish the first phase of it that they have the materials and funding for, and then it's going to be suspended. The Egyptians are now attacking Gazan fishing boats. I mean, before it used to be when when they would go beyond their limit, Israeli patrol boats would shoot at them. Now the Egyptians are doing it, and with the Egyptians, it's just very a Gazan fisherman described it to me. It's just very random. I mean, they'll be 2 miles off the coast, and they'll run into an Egyptian patrol boat that will say, what are you doing here? What's your business? Transport of goods and people, from Egypt into Gaza and from Gaza to Egypt is, all but closed down. So, you have a lot of discontent, and people are very dissatisfied. And I mean, I would say, if you were to have elections like tomorrow, I mean, it's very likely that, Hamas will be voted out of, everyone talks about this, be voted out of power. But that's not going to happen. I mean, there's talk about reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, but there's so much bad blood. I mean, from the conflict where Fatah was kicked out to Hamas wanting to retain political control. That seems very, very unlikely. So meanwhile, I mean, the average Gazan is suffering. They're cut off. And there's even talk of, political unrest. I mean, similar to what happened to Egypt. I mean, the 14th of November, people are talking about a tamarrud Gaza. So, popular unrest and demonstrations on the 14th of November to try to, imitating what the tamarrud movement in Egypt. So meanwhile, I mean, humanitarian organizations like ANERA, I mean, we do the best we can to do our projects in economic development and health, education, distribution of medicines and other in-kind resources like, winter boots and shoes. But it's, it's a very concerning situation. It's not as... the Syrian crisis is definitely, an immediate humanitarian emergency. But the way I would describe Gaza, it's sort of a gradual and now accelerating deterioration of coping mechanisms that Gazans are able to cope with being cut off, with rising prices, with the high cost of consumer goods now, and we really, as as the international community, international organizations like ANERA, really have to go back and see how we can address the access issue, because it's people are really desperate and worried. So open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I suggest you address your questions to either Samar or Paul. And who's the first going to ask the first question? Tom New.
Okay. Paul, in practical administrative terms, are you able to bring your staff down to Gaza and the Gaza staff back to Jerusalem?
We can bring in, it's easier to bring in someone from Jerusalem ID holder into Gaza. It normally, the permit issue on the Israeli side can take, from a couple of weeks to a month, but that's worked out. It's more difficult for West Bankers. On the Gazan side, that hasn't been a real issue. I mean, we've been consistently, with the exception of a couple of staff, we haven't had any issues bringing Gazans to Jerusalem. They'll get a 2 or 3 day permit. On the Hamas side, though, they need to get an exit permit, Gazans leaving, and there was talk of Hamas trying to, nail the staff of international organizations to pay taxes. And OCHA, the UN, intervened, and that restriction was taken away, but they do need an exit permit from Hamas.
Samar, let me ask you about the refugees in Lebanon from Syria. Are they able to conduct business or create any employment themselves? Or are they strictly at the mercy of the humanitarian agencies? Is there any way for them to earn income?
I'll answer this in 2 parts. The Syrian refugees are allowed work in Lebanon. if they have money, they can open business. They can work as laborers. Of course, there isn't enough jobs for everybody. But if you're a Palestinian Syrian, no, you're not allowed to work, because Palestinians are simply denied work opportunities in Lebanon. You have this, but also the fact is that Palestinian Syrians don't have the experience of labor work in Lebanon. Lebanon has always relied on as skilled and semi-skilled laborers in a number of its sectors, especially agriculture and building sector, the real estate, on Syrian labor force. So many of these Syrian laborers come either seasonally or permanently and work in Lebanon. Palestinian Syrians don't have this experience in Lebanon, so you have a combination of not allowed to work and don't have the know-how and the experience and the connections in Lebanon.
I had a question about the education gap you were talking about. Are they trying to set up schooling within the areas where the refugees are settling? Are there concentrations where they can find teachers who come from Syria even?
Yeah, there are a number of initiatives from the UNRWA and international organizations and national organizations who are working a lot, by the way, to respond to this crisis. But what we're saying that it is there and it's successful, but it's not enough. There's a big gap. And the problem is that also with the increase of educational gap for students, setting up schools on its own is not enough. We need to accompany this with remedial education to rehabilitate the kids to re-enter into education. And this is very serious, because all studies have indicated that nothing brings a child to normalcy in a displacement situation like going back to school. It immediately puts the whole atmosphere back to normalcy to this child.
Sorry, going back to your point about the lack of protection, the absence of protection for Palestinian Syrians because of the very specific UNRWA mandate. What specifically is being done to fill that gap, or is there nothing really being discussed in that matter?
If it's discussed, but no measures are made there, because this is an ongoing problem for Palestinians since 1948, since the Nakba, because this is not specific to the Palestinian Syrians now. It just surfaced as a big problem. But this has been the problem of Palestinian refugees who have been kicked out of their country and fled neighboring countries and became refugees. And they simply, all Palestinian refugees lack this protection mechanism.
Paul, could you describe the logic and the rationale behind the Israeli closure? You mentioned security. Are they using the latest technology to scan shipments in and out of Gaza? That is well-known and well-established technology. Are they taking advantage of that? Or is the closure more of a punitive measure? I remember that at times there's very, very close ties between Israeli and Gazan companies, and mutually profitable. Is any of that left now? And is there an Israeli business lobby that's trying to reopen Gaza because of the profits that they could make there.
Well, on the technology side, I mean, the Israeli crossing point does have a lot of scanners, and so it's very sophisticated. So they look at the packing list. If there's anything restricted, you have to take it out. So all of this stuff has to be done beforehand, and then they'll scan it and check it. I mean, we use an Israeli transport company to bring our stuff into Gaza, and there's still a lot of ties. I mean, one of the Israeli managers of this company was military commander in Gaza in the 80s. He's a retired general. Israeli of Iraqi origin, fluent in Arabic, and I mean, he picks up the phone and will call his Gazan counterparts and say, Abdullah, I'm bringing, 200 tons over in 2 weeks. Be ready. And they know each other, and there's a lot of contact. I mean, I've met a lot of Israelis that talk about the days when they would go to Abu Hasira, a famous fish restaurant in Gaza, and have fish, and get all their car. I mean, and more importantly, it was the cheapest place in Israel, Palestine, to get your car repaired. So everyone from Tel Aviv would drive down and go to a Gazan garage and have their car fixed. And now they're paying like 50% more than what they used to pay when they would take it to Gaza. So I mean, there's a group on both sides that would hope that they could go back to what it was. I mean, when you were at the consulate, but people get older and grayer, and the ones who are talking like that are have whiter hair, grayer hair, and getting older. So. The new generation, unfortunately, doesn't have that contact. Older Gazans, I mean, they speak Hebrew. So, I mean, and the younger ones don't, even though they have it at university, they don't learn Hebrew like their parents used to. So that's being lost, I mean, gradually, that connection. And in the meantime, I mean, I would say the Israeli measures are... I mean, it's in the name of security, but there's also a punitive, definitely a punitive element. And, when they want to apply pressure on Hamas for anything, I mean, then instead of having a list with, 200 items, it goes to 300 items or 150, or then there's exceptions. So it's, the policy of getting things into Gaza and the politics are intricately linked.
Are there any exports going out of Gaza to third countries?
There was to Egypt to a limited extent, but into Israel, no, not anymore.
Into Europe? Of course, they have to go into Israel and then out of Israel.
That's right. No, very little, hardly. I mean, I haven't seen any exports on the, coming through the Israeli side.
Yes.
Has Israel allowed any Palestinian Syrians to return to Palestine?
No. I mean, there's been talk. I mean, this was a year ago, and I know it was on the PA, Palestinian Authority's agenda, was to use, some areas, what will eventually, become a Palestinian state, to resettle refugees from Syria and Lebanon. But that was only, it's sort of been just at the the hypothetical level, never concretely put. So
But this crisis is not going to go away soon. Is the option of the potential for foreign countries to adopt more generous refugee quotas for Palestinians? Is that a viable idea? And evidently someone has raised it, but it hasn't prospered. Is that right?
Well, I mean, in Gaza in particular, I mean, if you go to Ottawa, Canada, I mean, they're calling it Little Gaza, and there's a large population of Gazans living in Canada, in particular Ottawa. I mean, I think that would be that would definitely be welcome, and it might help address some of the immediate population needs for services. But to Palestinians, that would sort of be diluting their wish to remain connected to where they live. So I don't know, I think that would be a bit controversial. Even though I'm not saying that a lot of people would line up and try to get visas, but I think the attention really needs to be on the situation in Gaza and the situation in the West Bank, and trying to break the impasse that's happening right now.
Samar, in Lebanon, is there a large flow of Palestinian refugees, traditional refugees from Israel, and new refugees from Syria out? Are visas usually unavailable for immigration?
You mean, do they require visas to enter Lebanon?
No, to get out of Lebanon and go to Ottawa, or go to Miami, or Paris.
I think some countries have opened up a little bit for Syrian refugees, especially Canada, Sweden, Scandinavia is usually very sympathetic. But I didn't hear myself of a big big scale migration, but of course individual you have plenty there lined up in all embassies.
Yes.
A question for Paul on the Gaza issue. That the figure you gave was staggering to me, the amount of tunnels there was, and now there's only 5. So one question related to that is there been pressure by any governments to have further open access to the area? And related to that, I understood that one of the U.S. administration policies of Secretary Kerry's thing about economic development in the West Bank actually did include Gaza, is my understanding. So is there any talk about that? Because if you can't get anything in or out, I don't see how that's going to happen. But has that got into any traction at all?
Well, one thing is the crossing between Egypt and Gaza and Rafah needs to be really upgraded. I mean, the facilities when the Muslim Brotherhood, when Morsi was in power, and you had an increase in traffic from Egypt, it was very clear that crossing has limited capacity. So, if Gaza, it is included in the Kerry plan, and if things move forward, you'd really need to upgrade all the crossing facilities. On the one hand, on the Israeli side, they have high capacity but high regulations. So, that would have to change. And then you have, the airport that's still destroyed, and the ports, which are non-operative. So, you could bring a lot of stuff in by sea and by air. But, obviously, that's, and I think, an economist told me just to, get the airport back and running, that's like $1 billion investment. And, the ports were never rehabilitated, even during Oslo. They never got to that point until, before the second Intifada. So that's another huge construction project. So anyway, but that...
There's long been talk of a deep water port in Gaza. They never started construction, did they, or did they?
No, it never started construction, and the only boats that really operate are less than the length of this hulls, so just little fishing putt-putt boats. But that's, yeah, so, and, you know, the old port of Gaza basically is kind of still, you know, it looks like something out of, you know, the Ottoman Empire. It's set up to receive sailing vessels, not, you know, not big cargo ships.
Sure.
The focus has been on, Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank a little bit, but I'm just wondering about the Jordanian side of things. Aren't there Palestinians as well who would be Syrian refugees in Jordan?
Yeah. Since I'm in Lebanon, I cannot answer first-hand information, but what we know about the situation is based on the news as well as people traveling there, is that there are also the Jordanian government limits and has restrictions on the entry of Palestinian Syrians, but those who enter are allowed into the refugee camp or camps that are been established by the Jordanian government to receive Syrians. And I'm sure all of you have heard about the conditions of these camps there.
Yes, sir.
Maybe just to follow up on that in a little bit more detail, what I've heard is that the Syrians coming into Jordan are really quite poor, economically disadvantaged, whereas the caricature of those Syrians who are entering Lebanon are those who are much better off financially. Is that what you have observed in Lebanon?
As I told you in the beginning, the number of those refugees who came to Lebanon has reached, as officially stated by the government of Lebanon, to 1 million individuals, which I assure you not all of them are rich, but I'm sure there's a certain percentage of them, and these are not the target of our attention, is, yes, come from, they're wealthy, they have their own resources. As you know, Syria has always been a country that that has a big range of businessmen and big businesses that are operating in Syria. So you have the refugees are those with means and those who are not, those who don't have means. But a common characteristics among the Syrian refugees, whatever your means are, is that their the monetary value of their savings have deteriorated. They have lost more than 3 times the value of their money because of the deterioration of the value of their currency.
Yeah, the Syrian lira is
exactly.
worthless.
So even those, of course, I can tell you that the majority are those who don't have money. Second is that with even what you call the middle class have come to Lebanon with a country whose cost of living is 3 times the cost of Syria before the devaluation of their currency. So already they're coming to a much more expensive country. With the devaluation of their currency, most of them are not able to sustain their living. So you have people who their savings have been consumed, and I know many families opt to go back, live under danger, or be displaced inside Syria simply because they simply can't afford it.
Has there been a major international conference on the refugee flows from Syria and a pledging apparatus, or is the need being met by ad hoc contributions from governments and NGOs?
And the last big one happened in Qatar, and which was 1 year ago, something like this. And there were many pledges from states, including the Arab states, but unfortunately, not all of these pledges have been made. Mostly because I think of political connotations and developments. And the situation is not, it's just the impact of this on the people themselves is big. And I think also, the humanitarian assistance is not only needed, I thank you for your question on the Palestinian, from the Jordanian side, but also we worry also on the people who are inside Syria, whom we don't know much about. And these are people who need real assistance. And this is where also there's much challenges of reaching them. And this is a big major concern for all humanitarian and international assistance.
Sir.
What is the state of the water supply in Lebanon? What's been the impact of so many refugees on the water supply?
Okay. Usually Lebanon is rich in water, but because we have a problem with collecting our water properly, in summer we have shortage of water. To my knowledge, the impact of having Syrians did not affect that, but it's increasing the political division in the country, with some pro-regime and against regime parties in Lebanon. It's impacting the economy in a way that also it's creating tension, because some Lebanese consider that Syrians are competing for their jobs, especially the skilled laborer sector and some businessmen. Third, it's overcrowding, and it's putting pressure on the resources, on the local resources, accessing government hospitals or schools, and taking refuge in practically everywhere, as I told you, is also a concern. And lastly, the security concerns that comes with it.
I have a question. Samar, there's something I don't understand about refugees making money off of other refugees. That some of the Syrian Palestinians are living in horrendous conditions in the camps. One dark, dank room, 10 people corrugated tin roof, and they're paying $150 to somebody who's also a refugee in the same camp. What are the dynamics involved in that?
I started with that, Alan. Maybe you weren't here, but even if these cases happen, the impact of the displacement of the refugee has been absorbed by the host community. This is a fact. Government efforts and so were simply non-existent in this case, whether Syrian or Syrian Palestinian. The local community has hosted it, but a host community that is already poor, overstretched, cannot sustain this, Till now, it has been more than generous, but also after 2 years plus of the crisis, it's also overstretching its generosity and resources. So, of course, tension exists. And because the poor are hosting the poorest. So this is the dynamics. And also the rare places available in the camps are also subject to supply and demand. So, yes, you can find one room for $150 a month of rent in the camps.
Well, Samar and Paul, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.